speaking of bread and butter, let's get into this. I know you've talked about it a little bit here and there, but for my listeners,
Sure.
why did you leave ESPN after, I believe, 15 years?
15 years. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately for me, and I'll just say this off the top, because ask me whatever you need to ask me or whatever you want to ask me. I'm happy to get into this, and I'm excited to talk about it to an audience that is interested in sports media. But just I'll say off the top that ESPN did right by me. Nothing bad to say about them. The reason, Jimmy, that you care about me, the reason that anyone's listening to this interview is thanks to the power of those four letters. And so, please take everything that we're about to talk about here with the idea that, like, I leave ESPN with love in my heart and nothing but good things to say about the company. But in terms of why I decided to leave, is that I thought ultimately that for this stage of my career, there were a couple things that were really important to me, in addition to like just the obvious stuff, right? So the obvious stuff is, of course, being able to take care of my family and provide for my wife and kids, and also be able to do fantasy and ultimately betting analysis on, we always want to have a large platform and be able to broadcast or write to as many people as possible. So with those caveats, the things that were most important to me were I wanted to be part of NFL coverage. Like, I think that when you have a fantasy conversation, when you have a betting conversation, you're having an NFL conversation. I don't think they are separate. They were maybe back in the day, but that is if you and I were to have a fantasy conversation right now, we're doing the same thing. We're talking ball. We're just, we have a slightly different lens on it, but it's the same thing. You're talking about players, you're talking about matchups, you're talking about the game and what you think will happen or what happened and why it happened. So I think it's an important conversation. And to your point about like being everyone's bread and butter, the NFL is the premier sports league in the world. And I believe fantasy is a massive way that fans engage with the NFL. And I wanted to be more closely aligned with NFL coverage. I wanted to be a part of it. So that was reason one. And
let me interrupt just real quick, I just want to follow up on that, because I don't know if people listening are thinking this, but what I'm thinking is the ESPN has NFL coverage and they probably have it better than ever now. The NFL is giving them a good schedule. Joe Buck, Troy Aikman. They're getting better games. They're getting more playoff games, Super Bowl down the road. So is it that ESPN never had you on their NFL coverage, or because ESPN has NFL coverage? So I'm just curious.
Correct. I mean, I've done some NFL coverage over the years. When I first started there, I would do a segment on Sunday NFL Countdown. I had from the set of the fantasy show on ESPN Plus, we would do a 45-second hit that would run on Monday Night Countdown that was sponsored. It was a sponsored element. So, that one of the sponsors had paid for there to be a fantasy element, and so they would use me for that. And over the years, I've popped up on NFL Live. I haven't recently in the last couple of years, but I was there 15 years. So I've certainly done, I've popped in and out of NFL coverage at ESPN. But in terms of where the company sits today, at least at the time that I was still there, the fantasy department and the fantasy coverage of ESPN and the NFL department and the NFL coverage are two separate entities. The people in charge of those entities are different people. There's not a lot of interaction between the two. Interaction is probably not the right word, but there's not a lot of overlap, I should say. Maybe that's a good way to say. And so, we did our, Sunday NFL Countdown had their own producers and their own cast, and, Fantasy Football Now on ESPN2 Sunday mornings had their, I was part of that show, and we had our own production staff and a lot less promotion. And so, so the answer is that, yes, ESPN has a lot of NFL coverage, and, and they do a really good job with it. And they've been real successful with how they've approached it. They just, whether it was they didn't dig me, or they just didn't believe fantasy was a part of, it just wasn't going to be. I was never an integrated part of Monday Night Countdown or Sunday NFL Countdown, any of our biggest platforms, even NFL Live. I was never, not only was I never a big part of any of those shows, I never was going to be. And I knew that, and that's no disrespect to ESPN. Like, it's not my job to run that company. The people that run the company have made that decision, and they've done very successfully. They're running a business and it works for them. but for me, it was important. And as it became apparent that there was a chance that I might leave ESPN, me and my agents had conversations, in some cases, multiple conversations with every NFL partner. And that includes ESPN, every broadcast partner of the National Football League. And we expressed that desire. And, we felt, by we, I mean, me and my agents, we felt pretty confident that if we left ESPN, that there would be an NFL broadcast partner that would want me to be a big part of their NFL coverage, not sort of off to the side, not of like, oh, here's a small clip of them from the show or whatever. And so that was really important to me.
So you said you spoke to all the broadcast partners of the NFL. What was it about NBC that made you decide to go there?
Well, there was a lot, right? I mean, first off, in my opinion, they have the best. It's football night in America. They have the best game of the week. And I say, with no disrespect to any of the other NFL broadcast partners, I think the NFL actually did a great job with the schedule, sort of doling out all the big games. But Sunday night is the best game of the week and has been for a long, long time. And I think it is once again this year. You look at the schedule and it's just a ridiculous schedule starting next Thursday night, Bills at Rams. That's on NBC. And then Buccaneers, Cowboys on the first Sunday night. And think about like week 4, Chiefs at Bucks, Mahomes and Brady. Like, anyway, it's a ridiculous schedule. And so when NBC said to me, we want to put you on football night in America, and not as a token, not as like you'll be from some set of your podcast and you'll pop on with like, here's one sleeper for 30 seconds. Like, you're going to be an integrated part of this cast. You're going to do multiple segments. It's football night in America. It's the second highest rated show, not sports show. It's the second highest rated show in all of television, second only to the actual game itself. And so it was sort of like, there's a lot of other reasons at NBC. There was a familiarity and comfort level with the executives. I had multiple meetings with them and just sort of, they recruited me, and it was really, honestly, flattering, really flattering. The cast that they had, people getting to work with, a lot of the people, I'm fans of a lot of the people, they've all been incredibly welcoming. And so there was that Sunday night game. On a personal level, it's in Stamford, Connecticut, where I'm going to be based out of. So just, I wouldn't have to move. I wouldn't have to, yank my kids out of school. I live in Connecticut, obviously, because of ESPN. So just not having to uproot my family was a big thing. The fact that NBC said to me, like, hey, not only is it going to be football night in America, and, we want to use you to help us with Peacock. But like I said, like, you think about the breadth of events that NBC has, as we just talked about, Olympics, Indy 500, Kentucky Derby, NASCAR, MLB, Premier League, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, obviously ESPN has a ton of events, but I'm a football guy at NBC. At ESPN, I was a football guy purely. And so they were like, we want you to be involved in all these huge tentpole events. And we're going to look for other opportunities with some of our entertainment properties. We think there's some potential there. Just all of it. And then the last thing that NBC said to me, and all of that to me is, enough, right? Sort of like you had me at hello. You had me at football night in America. But the last thing, Jimmy, and this is the second reason why I left ESPN and that NBC was into, NBC said, we know you have these businesses that you've started, these small businesses, fantasylife.com, the Fantasy Life newsletter, the Fantasy Life app, just a lot of things under the brand of Fantasy Life. We know you have these businesses that you care about. And ESPN very graciously offered me a new 3-year extension and, a raise. But part of that offer was that I would have to get rid of all those side businesses that I'd built up over the last couple of years. And my previous contract with ESPN, I had carve-outs for all those things. And
I was going to say, I should know this and I don't, and I'm sure my listeners would be confused. Like, why were you able to do all those businesses and then you wouldn't be able to do all those businesses?
Yeah, I think, I don't want to speak for ESPN. That's not my place. But my perception, if I can, is that my previous deal was a 7-year deal.
Wow.
And the sports landscape has changed significantly, and something that they were okay with 7 years ago
Right.
In terms of, 7 years ago, betting wasn't legal. PASPA hadn't been overturned. And so I think when they approved those 7 years ago, they didn't contemplate that those businesses, neither did I. I mean, who knew 7 years ago? But they didn't contemplate that at some point those businesses might get into sports betting and might get into paid content. 7 years ago, that was not a focus of ESPN or Disney, where it is now. And so I think they felt like, again, I don't want to speak for ESPN, but I think they felt like, my perception is that their opinion of those side businesses changed from 7 years ago as to now.
Gotcha.
And in terms of, competitiveness or what have you. And so